Lately, I've been trying to send you stories every day, but I feel like a large number of people who have signed up almost never come back to listen to the stories. I don't know where that is. Make you unhappy? I hope to receive comments and suggestions from you, and if you find the video good, please give me a like to give me more motivation. For those who have not yet subscribed, don't forget to click the subscribe button and press notification bell to wait for the next story. Now let's get into the story. Story 1. I live in Carroll Island, a place where you can find a good amount of forestry everywhere. This was located in Baltimore County. I love this bit of forestry. I have lived in the same house since I was 7 or 8 years old. The forests that surround my house always had some urban legend behind them. Some of these were mostly told by older kids who were just trying to scare the kids who would wander about the streets. The teens would always go into the woods to smoke pot and drink alcohol. I hated that, but it's how they got their kicks. I was outside my house sometime near January on a full moon. This is when clowns were starting to appear all over the place. I never believed in them and still don't, but this night was different. I walked inside my house with my brother and my friend who we'll call Kyle. Kyle was from the Dominican Republic and had always believed in the paranormal. We were hanging out in my brother's room watching the controversial Logan Paul suicide forest video. Once it was done, Kyle remembered it was a full moon that night and that the clowns supposedly were going to come out. I told him I didn't believe in it and that it was all just a hoax. He told me that if I didn't believe, they would get me. I laughed at that remark. That's when my brother, who I'll call Josh, sat up and said that I was just being a wuss. I told him that he was being a jerk. We got into a conversation for about a good 10 minutes when Kyle finally says, "If you don't believe in them and you're not afraid, why don't you go prove it?" I said fine and told him that I would be right back. I know just the place to prove it. There was a little place down the road that was put there for a park, essentially. The only thing that it had was a small bridge that went over a pond. I left the house, got onto my bike, and rode off. At the entrance, there's a set of woods that is private property for houses on the water and some abandoned houses inside. The entrance is easy to see, can't miss it, and personally, I thought it looked really nice and non-threatening. As I was walking up to the entrance, I had noticed a foul odor. Keep in mind that this is a wildlife area where things tend to die and decompose. I was about to walk into the park when I shit you not, something had spoken to me in a low, somewhat luring voice. "Hey there, kiddo." This is when I went into panic mode. I am someone who isn't scared off easily, but somebody had spoke to me and were hiding the unknown. That's what scared me, not knowing who it was or where they were. I turned towards the small patch of bushes near the entrance, and I see something crouched over deep in the bushes, facing me. I couldn't tell if it was a clown. I didn't care at this point. I just knew it was a person. I was about to man up and walk towards it to see who it was, when he spoke again. "That's right, come over here." That's when I knew it was time to leave. I instantly wailed in fright, almost pissing myself, and crashed into my bike. I floored it back to my house, and at this point my body is in complete hysteria, and Kyle said that once he opened the door, I was not comprehensible. It took me a few minutes to calm down and realize that I didn't need to be scared anymore. I explained to Kyle and Josh what happened, and we agreed to go back the next day and check it out. The next day we did not go, and I have not been back since. I sure as hell will never go there alone again, at night. Story 2. This happened to me yesterday, when me and my best friend were just hanging out as we normally do, at my house. We were really bored, so we decided to take a walk around my neighborhood, or so we thought. Let me tell you about my block. There is a hospital nearby, and my neighborhood has a history of drug and alcohol-related incidents, but those don't happen very often. Nevertheless, it was kinda shady. So my friend and I, for privacy reasons we'll just call her Jay, were talking, messing around and such for the entire walk, having a blast in each other's company, until we were about to reach my house to finish the walk. Now let me set the scene. So we had just turned a corner to walk down our street, with houses on one side, a parkland on the other, and a 2-lane road separating them. My house is right next to the parkland. Jay and I were walking down the footpath on the side of the parkland, towards my house, in silence, just taking in the views, I guess. I don't remember. But when we were about 50 meters away from my house, I heard a footstep about 15 meters away from me and Jay. Only one single step. I casually turned around, expecting a young teenager, or maybe an elderly person, because that's usually who we would see walking along these footpaths in my area. But what I saw will be burned into the back of my head for years. 15 meters away, there was this very off-looking man. He looked relatively young, I'd say, maybe mid-20s. He had a skinny figure and dull, lifeless eyes. He wore a dark hoodie and jeans, and he was looking at me with this very unsettling look in his eyes. But the absolute worst part of this was that the man was limping very aggressively towards us. It looked unnatural. It looked like he was possessed, and he had the most disturbing grin on his face that I've ever seen in my life. It was twisted, his head was cocked to the side, and the man's teeth were so yellow, I could actually see it from 15 meters away. He looked psychotic, and he looked like he wanted to harm us, in a very brutal way. I whipped back around and told Jay to start to quickly walk back to my house, because running might make the man angry and then run after us. We don't know if he's high, drunk, or what, but I was too panicked. I didn't even mention why we needed to run. Jay turned around and almost screamed, and stared in shock. I've never in my life seen someone pull that kind of face before. I grabbed her wrist and we sped up to reach home. I turned around and the man was about 9 or 10 meters away, and he was moving faster. With that disturbing broken limp of his. If it did not look scary or unnatural to begin with, it sure did now. We are 2 young teenagers, and even if we both fought against the man, I don't think we would win. Even if he was on the skinnier side. We sped up, and it was a full-blown chase. No running, but very close enough. He was chasing us with this fast demonic limp, and we sped our walking to the maximum, trying to keep the now 10-meter gap between us. We managed to get home safely, and I peeked through the window by myself as Jay was in shock for a bit. The man had slowed down, but was still limping. He had crossed over to the other side of the road. He went out of sight, and I closed the curtains, still shaking. After all of that, Jay and I went back into the kitchen to grab some water. My kitchen window kind of overlooks a bit of the parkland, and we had a decent view of it. We both saw the man slink back into the parkland, and then never saw him again. Afterward, I thought about the whole incident, and probably got even more unsettled. I only heard one footstep. No pattern. Nothing. Just a thump on the ground. That's it. It then hit me. The man was trying to attack Jay and I. He was trying to sneak up on us. It gives me the chills to think about it, knowing that if I didn't hear that single footstep, or didn't turn around, we could have been in some serious trouble. Who knows what could have happened? Story 3. Back when I was a freshman in high school, I was part of this choir where we would sing the songs that our school required us to sing, like the national anthem, or some church song. To be honest, I was the best singer, and only joined for the benefit of skipping class. The skipping class part was great and all, but staying late for practice was kind of a downside, especially when it was before a big school event. One day, we had to practice near the school's botanical garden, because the place where we usually practice was being occupied by another group of people. Some of the members of the choir were kind of hesitant about practicing near the gardens, because there had been a lot of scary stories surrounding the place, and no two accounts are the same. I, on the other hand, just wanted practice to be over. We practiced until around 8 or 9 p.m. At around this time, there would be only 2 gates that would be open if one wanted to leave the school. The college gate, which was all the way across from where we practiced, and the track and field gate, which was near, but you had to pass through the garden to get there. Me, being a lazy man, decided to take the shortest route outside the school, while the rest wished me luck and went the other way. I believe that any place can be creepy as long as it is dark, and the gardens were no exception. I brought my phone to call my parents. It rang once before being answered. I talked into my phone, telling my parents where to pick me up. But no answer. I stopped the call, and then called back. Same thing. No answer. I called for the 3rd time to ask them to pick me up, almost shouting into the phone for an answer, but still got nothing. Finally, I gave up and decided to text them. After walking through the garden for about a couple more minutes, I finally reached my waiting destination without incident. It was a creepy walk, but I was kind of relieved that nothing out of the ordinary happened. My parents came after about 15 minutes of waiting, but something was off. When they stopped the car in front of me, they got out and frantically asked if I was all right, and they seemed very worried. I told them I was fine. They told me that they got all of my calls, and I asked them why they didn't respond. They told me they did. All they heard was me screaming, "Help me," over and over again. Story 4. This story took place my sophomore year of high school. I was 15, young for my grade. It was a Wednesday in the winter. I joined the honor society at my school. Besides meeting and talking about how to help my community, we also had to meet at 7:20 a.m., which was 25 minutes before school. And since I was a morning person, missing more time to sleep was always frustrating. That's why I was always late. On this day, I was running late again. Being 15 years old, I couldn't drive myself to school yet, so I had to have my grandma, who lives with my mother and I, take me to school, since at this time my mother would be getting ready for work. My grandma hit the garage door button on the wall, and we got into the car. Once backing out and closing the door, she would pull out of the driveway. Now, she looked back towards the front windshield to pull out to the right towards the street in our cul-de-sac, and I screamed for her to stop, and she quickly slammed on the brakes. There was a man, about 6 feet tall, dirty blonde hair, wearing all black. He was only illuminated by the headlights, since on winter mornings, it was pitch black, and today it was raining. I noticed something in his hand. Being the observant person I was, I thought I saw a knife. The man didn't look at us, or wave to say sorry. He just stood there, in front of the lights for about 10 seconds, before continuing to walk through our yard, towards our neighbor's house. We watched him disappear into the darkness. I live in a neighborhood where we all know each other and watch out for each other. We all own about 1 acre of land. Recently, my neighbors have had work done around their houses, including taking down some trees. So my grandma, with her heart of gold, continued driving as we discussed what just happened. She assumed that he was just a worker or something, working on the property. I knew that he wasn't. I told her I thought he had a knife, and she brushed it off, saying maybe he was just a worker holding a dustpan or shovel. He could have just been walking through our yard like a shortcut. But no. Something told me I had to warn my mother. So I began trying to text my mom, but no texts were sending. Nothing was going through. I texted her, "Lock the door right now." But when it went through, she didn't understand. She started questioning me, saying why, what's wrong? At this point, I called her, quickly explaining the situation and yelling for her to lock the door right away. She did. And 2 seconds after she did, the man opened the screen door and tried to get into the house. When it didn't work, he tried to kick the door down. My mother then called the police. I don't know how quickly the police arrived, but we live in a small town, so I assumed the response time was fast. When the police arrived, she told them what happened, and they wrote a report. Later that morning, the man was found a couple roads down. He tried to get into some other houses too, and when he did end up getting into a house, a man had chased him out with a shotgun. He was caught and arrested, and was found with a huge butcher knife. Although this isn't the most extreme ending, it always holds a lot of what-ifs. What if I hadn't been late that day? What if I hadn't gotten a hold of my mom? And the biggest one of all, what if I wasn't late, and my grandma would have asked him if he needed help? I'm now a junior in high school, and it's been a year, but the effects of this encounter still haunt me. I'm afraid to be alone. I will double-check, or even triple-check the locks, and listen intently to the sounds in my house when trying to go to sleep. If I hear something, I'll get up and check it out every time. He has made me paranoid, but I guess my fears are rational. Who expects their own home to be the site of a creep encounter? Story 5. I was 16 at the time of this event. My close friend Sheila and I were driving back home from visiting my distant family in West Michigan. Back then I resided in Portsmouth, Virginia. It was 11 p.m., and we were the only drivers on the road. Mind you, I have never taken this way before, as I wanted to skip the toll roads this time. Sheila and I were so busy in conversation that we hadn't noticed coming upon an abandoned town somewhere in Pennsylvania. As we finally caught hold of our surroundings, I had a horrible feeling in the pit of my stomach. My friend caught on as she asked me if I was all right. I said yes, I'm okay. This town is just creeping me out. I really wasn't lying. There were old houses with boarded-up windows, and abandoned old town stores. Even cars and trucks were left abandoned on the road. It honestly looked like a scene out of a horror movie. My friend and I stayed silent. You could feel the drastic change in the air. It felt sinister. A couple minutes of silence pass, and my car starts to shake. I realize that we're out of gas. I forgot to stop miles back in a different town. Shit. I yelled, pulling over in front of me. Right in front of another abandoned house. Oh, what a great place to break down at, she laughs nervously. I nod, agreeing with her sarcastic comment. I took my phone out to call roadside assistance that my parents programmed into my phone. I didn't have cell reception, so I got out of the car, and Sheila followed. Now, this is where it got scary. I'm completely focused on getting reception, that I didn't realize that Sheila was staring completely ahead, looking terrified. She whispered my name before pulling on my shirt. She points ahead. There's a man standing about 10 feet away from us. I follow her gaze, and I see him standing in front of my car headlights. How can anyone be here? This place is a dead town. I didn't breathe or speak. My heart was in my stomach. But finally, Sheila spoke up. Do you need something? She called out. But right then, he tilted his head and smiled widely, scaring us even more. At this point, I'm so terrified, I can't even move. He just stares at us, smiling. My dad is a cop, Sheila yells. That was a big mistake on her part. His expression turned to anger, and he started to walk towards us, very fast. Our adrenaline kicked in, and we ran back to the car, got inside and locked the doors. We looked up, and the man was gone. I was breathing so heavily. It was distracting me from the sound under the car. He was underneath the car. Sheila is screaming, with tears flowing down her cheeks. I was trying to stay calm, praying to God for my phone to get service. Suddenly, somehow, 2 bars popped up on my phone. I called the cops and alerted them about what was happening. They responded and said they would be there as soon as they could, in about 20 or 30 minutes. By the time the phone call ends, the sound under the car had stopped. I was on high alert, scared out of my mind. Sheila and I are basically hugging each other, crying. Suddenly, emotion leaves her face as she looks behind us through the back window. My heart tells me not to look, but I can't help it. I looked. I really wish I hadn't. The man and 4 other men were standing there. My heart dropped, and they all smiled. I realized they had baseball bats or something in their hands, but I started to hear police sirens and relief started to come over me. Sheila and I look to the front and see the cop car pulling up. I've never been so happy to see a police officer in my life. By the time he walked to my car, the people were gone. I was so shaken up I couldn't even explain to the cops what had happened. Sheila managed to do so. They offered to get gas for us, but instead I just begged them to bring us to a hotel in a very populated area so that I could call my parents to come get us. To this day, the cops never found the people or where they could have possibly come from. My guess is that they all lived in one of the abandoned houses. I really hope they block this town off someday. I never stopped in that town again. Story 6. I'm 25 years old now, and I was 17 when this happened. I'm 6 feet tall. I don't scare easy and never run from a fight. It was my senior year of high school, and I went to a party with my now ex-girlfriend. I let her drive, which was my first mistake. Long story short, we ended up arguing on the way home. The party was up in the hills. I live in upstate New York in a city called Elmira, and the hills surround my city. So in my drunken logic, I thought I would hop out of the car while driving home because she was pissing me off. I quickly realized this was a bad idea because I was still a good 30 minutes drive from my house, but in my drunken pride, I refused to call my girl to come back. By now, it's about 2:30 in the morning, and I'm trying to call my friends to pick me up, and nobody is answering. Finally, I get my friend Tyler on the phone. and he says he's going to be on his way in a minute. And I started walking on the road I was on. I was playing music on my phone as I walked. Mind you, I have woods on both sides of me. It goes road and small ditch and about 5 feet incline of straight trees and bushes. This is technically a 2-lane road, but there is no painted lines on it or anything of the sort. I started hearing noises in the woods on my right. I turned off the music and stood still when I heard something moving probably about 15 feet away to my right, but the sound stopped a couple of seconds after I did, like whoever it was didn't realize I had stopped and caught himself. I stood there a minute and then brushed it off, but I started walking down the middle of the road in case there is something out there. Being drunk, the normal warning bells that should have been going off weren't. Now, I'm just listening to the woods and the bugs while walking, which is creepy enough. And then I hear it again. It's like someone is walking and not even trying to be quiet. I stopped again, and then the sound started to get louder. Whoever it was walking towards me. I always walk around with a pocket knife, and this time was no different. Elmira isn't the best town, and a fight or worse is always around the corner. At this time, I pulled out my knife. This huge guy steps out of the tree line. Like I said before, I'm a pretty well-built and tall guy, by no means small. This guy towered over me. He was wearing a brown jacket with the hood up. I could tell he was older because he had white hair in his stubble. He had a weird face, looked kind of like Dolph Lundgren, the weird jawline and all. I can't see much else of him. Now, me being drunk and not knowing what to do, I said, "Guy, you scared the hell out of me. What are you doing?" He just stands there, says nothing back, just stares at me with his hands in his front pockets. This guy was starting to give me a really bad vibe, so we had a staring contest for about 30-45 seconds, but it felt like much longer. Then I said, "Are you good, bro?" Still nothing. I just start walking sideways so I can keep looking at the guy, and pull my phone out to call Tyler to see where he is. The only movement this guy made was turning his body to keep looking at me. By now, I'm walking backwards to keep eyes on him, and Tyler tells me he's close. While talking, I notice the guy disappeared. I start hearing more noises in the woods, and then I tell Tyler to hurry the hell up. At this point, I'm on the opposite side of the road, clutching my pocket knife, walking sideways, staring into the woods. Tyler finally pulls up next to me. I told him on the phone what was happening, and he gets out of the car. Everything is silent. We turned our flashlights on our phones and started looking around. That's when we started hearing people talking, and then out of nowhere, extremely loud noises, like 5-10 people are breaking branches and are approaching us very fast. We looked at each other, and then quickly got back into his car. As we were pulling away, 3 or 4 shadows jump out in the road, and then stop, staring into the car as we drove by. My question is, what the hell were those people doing in the middle of nowhere, with no lights or anything, at 3 o'clock in the morning? I have no idea, but I am so glad that Tyler pulled up when he did. I'm also glad I made sure to talk loud on the phone, and let them know that I was being picked up. I don't mess with the woods now, for good reason. Story 7. This event happened to me about 2 years ago. It was a few months after my 15th birthday. To give some background about the situation and about me, I was about 5'9" at the time, and the last school year I had done cross-country and wrestling as my sports. Now don't take this the wrong way, I was one of two 95-pound wrestlers on my team, being the second smallest kid on the team, so as you can assume, I was not the scary type. Also, me and my little brother were raised Mormon, even though we don't go to church now. So due to this fact, him and I were extremely sheltered from the real world, especially because we grew up in the mothership of Mormonism, Acca, Utah. To give you an idea, I did not have any idea about drugs before I moved to California. Now that you understand this about me and my little brother, let's get into the story. So it all started as a friendly road trip going from Utah back to California. It was me, Jake, my little brother, who was 3 years younger, Zach, my stepdad, my grandpa, and my grandma. My grandpa was driving with my grandma and shotgun, Jake and Zach in the middle row, and me in the very back with the luggage. After a long day of driving, we found a hotel to get a discount at in Mesquite, which is around Las Vegas. We stopped, parked, and got our room keys. Me, Zach, and Jake would be in one room with my grandma and grandpa in the other. After we got there, we all took our stuff to our rooms, and Jake and I wanted to go down for a swim because the hotel advertised their pool and it looked awesome. My stepdad graciously said that we could go and told us when to be back, and we said all right. This is when I should tell you that neither me and my brother had a cell phone. All I had was a second-generation iPod to tell the time. So when we got down there, we went to the pool for a bit, and then to the hot tub. There were two women in the hot tub. Let's call them Megan and Annie. Megan was a mother, and her children were playing in the pool. They were around mine and my brother's age. Annie was a lady who seemed to be in her 30s maybe, but for some reason she looked like she had lived on the streets her life. But no alarms were going off in my head yet. Looking back on it now as a 17-year-old, with everything I have learned, she was 100% on drugs. And I mean something hard like crystal meth or heroin. My little brother and I get into the hot tub, and soon we are all engaged in conversation. Annie was the one who pulled me and Jake into the conversation. She started off by asking how our day was going and questions like that, and soon started to ask where we were coming from, where we were going, and personal questions about us. This is the point where I want to say an alarm was going off, but I still just told her everything, not thinking at all. Later, Megan was talking to Jake and Annie, and I was listening when I glanced over at Annie, and she abruptly looks at me and says something along the lines of, "You know, it's very rude to look at someone's breasts without asking them first." After she says this, I'm completely dumbfounded. Then she continues and says something like, "Yeah, I know that they are nice, and I can understand why you were looking at them, me being older and all." At this point, I'm like, holy shit, lady, what the hell is the matter with you? What are you talking about? I'm only 15 years old, and I was not looking at your breasts. Then, Megan leaves abruptly and takes her kids back to the room, so it was just me, Jake, and Annie. The weird conversation continued, and eventually Annie said, "Do you guys want to come back to my room? I have something really cool that I want to show you," or something along those lines. Somehow, for some reason, Jake and I agreed to see what she was talking about. We started walking to her room, and we get to a point where we have to go up some stairs, and out of nowhere, Megan appears again, and says, "Nanny, I'll wait here with them, go get it. We'll wait for you," or something like that. Surprisingly, Annie complies and walks up the stairs to her room to get whatever it was she wanted to show us. As soon as Annie was out of sight, Megan turned to us, and with a terrified look on her face, said, "You need to leave right now. Go back to your room. And do not come back out here again." Right when we heard this, everything clicked in my head. Extreme stranger danger. Then me and my little brother ran as fast as we could back to our room. The whole night I was afraid she would find us somehow, so I couldn't sleep. Looking back at it now, I could have never seen my family again, been raped, or even killed. I might owe my life to Megan, and I deeply wish that I could say thank you. Story 8. This was in January of 2016. I had gone up to the shopping center that was about a 30-minute walk from my house. I had taken the bus up there, but it only stopped at the shopping center once an hour. While I was usually taking the bus home from the shopping center near my house, the bus wasn't due for another 45 minutes by the time I had done what I needed to do, and my 10-year-old brother was at home alone. So I decided to walk back to my house instead of waiting basically an hour for the bus. On the way home, I saw a man, maybe 45 years old, walking in the opposite direction towards me. I got the impression that he was dangerous. He didn't look right, probably because as he was walking, he was just staring at me intently. As he walked past me, I got a sinking feeling, like when you're on an airplane, and it starts its descent. As I continued to walk, I felt like someone was behind me, so when I got to the bus stop, I made it look like I was checking the bus times, which gave me an excuse to turn around, and once I did, my heart started racing. This guy had changed direction, and was now walking in the same direction as me. He was walking faster than he was before, and this scared the hell out of me. I was close to the road that I would usually turn up to get to my street. I turned on the street, and had walked about 25 meters up it, when I heard loud footsteps behind me. He was still behind me, and was getting closer. I decided that I would cross the road to put more distance between us, and also to get to the street that was across from me. From here, I could go a longer way home. This longer way home had lots of corners, making following me a lot harder to do. This street also had a lot of teenagers who were at home due to it being summer, so if the guy tried anything, there were a lot of people who would likely hear me screaming. Now, you may be wondering, why didn't you just call the police? I had been stupid, and left my phone at home, so that was not an option. Even if I did have my phone, I probably wouldn't have called, out of fear of provoking something. I'm about 170 centimeters, and weigh 64 kilograms. I am not large enough to take on this guy. He looked like he weighed about twice what I did, so I was going along the long route, when I turned to look behind me again. He was still there. This is where I started my plan to get back to my house. I turned the next corner and sprinted along the path, as quietly as I could. I was on the street that my house was on. If I was going straight home, I would have gone left, but I went straight ahead towards a small park that was just up the street from my house. The reason I did this was because I could go up through the park and around to get to my house. As I was crossing the road to get to the park, I looked back again, and I saw him jogging up the path I had just come from. He saw me, and started sprinting towards me. Luckily, I had a 150-meter head start. I ran through the park, up and around to the left. The area behind the park is like a maze, so this gave me an advantage. Once I was behind the park and out of his sight, I continued sprinting for a house that had an old shed in its front yard. The shed was empty, and the door was open, as always. So I hid in there, able to look through a mirrored window, and he was looking around for me. He then walked the way that I was planning on going to get to my house. I was still too scared to leave the shed, so I waited for about 10 minutes before I saw him walking back towards the park on his phone, and I could hear part of what he said. "Yeah, I lost her, but I think she lives around here." After he passed, I waited another 10 minutes before leaving the shed and sprinting to my house. I called my mom, who called the police, who, in turn, called me. I gave a description of the man and refused to leave the house alone for weeks. I never saw him again, and the police never found anybody. Story 9. Back when I was in high school, my friends and I would meet up with girls from MySpace. A lot of them thought that we were famous because we would promote our own music and parties on the website. Usually, I would direct message girls in order to get to know them, but one day, I checked my messages, and a girl told me that she loved my music. I went on her page, and she was beautiful, so I messaged her back. I let her know that I was interested, and I throw parties. She let me know how impressed she was, so I kept telling her how she can come to our parties and not let her in for free because money wasn't an issue. We messaged back and forth for about 2 days, and I asked her for her phone number. She let me know that she can only text right now, so we continued to conversate only through our phones. We decided to meet one day. I told her that we can go out, but she insisted that we meet at her house instead. As a teenage boy, I planned on going there by the end of the night anyway, so she sent me her address, and my GPS said it was about 30 minutes away. I know this sounds fishy, but I thought it was too, so I brought my friend with me. I had him sit behind the passenger seat just in case the girl gets in, so I pulled into a group of apartment buildings. This place definitely looks sketchy. There were boarded up windows on almost every building, trash on the ground, and there was no one around. As I'm pulling up, my friend and I looked at each other as if we knew something wasn't right. He said we should go, but I didn't. I texted, and I told the girl I was pulling up where she told me to, which was behind the building in the back. I backed into a parking spot, and she texted me asking if that was me. I let her know it was me, but I thought it was weird because there were no lights on, and again, there was no one around. So we sat there for about a minute, and she texted me back that she would be down soon. As I was texting back, all I hear is my friend scream, "Oh shit," along with the glass breaking and the footsteps running toward us. I look back, and I see a man in a ski mask trying to reach in the car and grab my friend. I look outside, and I see 3 more hooded men with ski masks on, and one of them yelled, "Get the driver." My friend screamed go, but I've never felt fear like this in my life. Luckily, I still had the car running. I put the car in drive, and we sped off. As I did that, my friend pulled the mask off the guy that was trying to grab him. We went straight to the police station, and my friend eventually ID'd one of the guys. The guy that he ID'd just so happened to be the guy who was texting me. I wish I can tell you that I have never done that again, but that would be a lie. That's just the only bad experience I ever had with meeting girls online. Story 10. This story is from a female's point of view. When I was in college, I worked in an Applebee's to make ends meet. I worked there from freshman year to senior year, so I had some regular customers. I had one that tipped me the most, and his name was Larry. Anyways, one day, while at work, I received a friend request on Facebook from a guy that was really attractive. I checked his page out before I accepted it, and it seemed legit, and he was in my city. As soon as I accepted it, He messaged me and said, "Hey, thanks for accepting my request." That was usually code for creep when someone does that, but he was cute. I said no problem, and we continued to converse. Eventually, after a few days chatting, we decided to go on a date. I decided to meet at Chili's on a Friday at 6 p.m. because I don't know this guy, and maybe he's crazy. I arrived at the restaurant before him, and I messaged him to let him know that our table was under my name, and he said okay. After about 20 minutes, I messaged him back, but he didn't reply until 20 minutes later telling me that he wasn't going to make it. I was pissed, but I ordered and ate my food. I left, and I drove home. When I got to my apartment, I walked up the stairs to get to my apartment, and I hear something behind me. I get to my door, turn to my left, and I see a man standing at the bottom of the stairs looking at me. I look closer, and I see that it's Larry, my customer at work. I frantically asked him, "What is he doing here?" And he told me it's okay. "Always make sure you make it home safe." Then he said, "Sorry I couldn't make it to the date." I said, "What?" I tried unlocking my door, but I dropped my keys, and he started running up the stairs yelling, "It's not what you think." I grabbed the keys, unlocked the door, and ran inside, closing my door behind me. He started banging on my door, telling me he was my best customer, and he deserved me. I called the cops, and they caught him outside in my car, just sitting there calmly. After that, I deleted all of my social media and dating apps. Then I quit my job at Applebee's. Ever since that experience, I'm very paranoid of people's intentions, and I always carry a pistol. Story 11. I was a big Tinder guy a few years ago. Everywhere I went, I would update my location, and then update, my body count. Then I quit doing Tinder, and stuck with Instagram. I know, they're completely different, and IG has a bunch of fake accounts. So I saw this girl commenting on all of my friends' pictures. Then she commented on mine. I also saw my friends replying, so I figured she was a real person, because I looked on her page, and she had way more followers than people she was following. So I DM'd her. I definitely thought she wasn't going to reply, but she did within an hour. We talked for maybe 2 or 3 weeks, and we made it official. She was pretty, had a degree, and a good job, as she said. I felt she was out of my league and too perfect. Every day, she posted new photos, and I told my friends about her, and they seemed pretty jealous, except for my friend Ryan. He said I was stupid because I never spoke with her, and I only messaged her. She invited me over because she said she can cook. Ryan told me to don't go. The rest of my friends said, don't have any kids, and they would laugh. So I went over there, but not without Ryan calling me a clown first. The GPS says she lived about an hour away. When I first started to talk to her, she told me that she lived in a nice neighborhood, but when I got there were people everywhere, and the neighborhood was not that nice. When I stopped at the stop sign at the corner, people walked up to my windows and asked me what do I need, but I pulled off really fast and got to the house. It was a duplex, so I messaged her, and she said they come up the stairs. It was about 9 at night, and people were everywhere just standing around. I knocked on the door, and I was definitely excited. The door opened, and to my surprise, it was a bald-headed white guy with a patchy beard, tattoos everywhere, including his head with a tank top on. I asked was Lisa home, and he said, yeah, come in. When I walked in, I was immediately hit with a musty smell mixed with cheese. He told me to sit down, and he sat down across from me on the couch. He said she'll be out soon. He asked me did I want something to drink, and I said, yeah, sure. When I got up, I texted her, can she come out, please? She immediately said yes. The man came back in with 2 cups of juice, one for him and one for myself. Then, I noticed that he put a phone down on the table next to him, so I acted like I sneezed and got some on my arm. Then, I asked for tissue. He went to get some tissue, and he left his phone like I thought he would. I texted her back, and to my horror, the phone rang. I looked on the caller ID, and it was my name. I heard him coming back. He came back, and we sat there for about a minute, and then the phone rang again because he never checked the message that I sent. He looked at the phone. I looked at the phone. Then we looked at each other. I postured up, and he calmly said, I guess you caught me. Then, out of nowhere, he lunged toward me, attempting to grab me. I punched him, and he fell on his face. I ran out of there so fast, and I never looked back. Yeah, I caught the cops, and when they got there, the man was still knocked out. After that, I never went on dates with people that I met online again. Story 12. I had 3 really good friends, and their names were Kevin, Ryan, and Tom. Every summer, our parents would take us on a vacation. We always stayed in a remote cabin in the forest of Minnesota. The cabin was located on a large island in the middle of Lake Vermilion. Eventually, when we were old enough, our parents let us go to the cabin on our own for the first time. When we got there, we parked the car on the gravel road beside the lake. Then, we had to take a boat across the lake about half a mile to reach the cabin. There were a few other cabins on the island, but they were all at least half a mile away. The cabin was quite small. It only had a kitchen, a bathroom, and 2 bedrooms. At night, it was pitch black. There were no streetlights for miles, and the only light came from the moon. There were no curtains on the windows, so when you were sleeping at night, you could see the moon shining down on the trees and the lake outside. On the 3rd night of our trip, we set up a campfire by the edge of the lake. The moon was full, and the pale white glow was shimmering across the lake. We were gazing up at the stars when all of a sudden, we heard a splashing sound, as if something was moving about in the water. Brian suddenly stood up and pointed, saying, "What the hell is that?" We all looked in the direction he was pointing, peering into the darkness. After a while, I couldn't make out what he was pointing at. I'll never forget the feeling of terror that came over me. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and goosebumps appeared on my arms. I was paralyzed in fear. Out in the middle of the lake, there was a woman's head. It was just floating there on the surface of the water, staring directly at us. She had pale white skin and long black hair. Her hair was matted to her face. The rest of her was submerged, or not even there. We tried to tell ourselves that it was just a loon. There are black and white birds that hunt at night, diving deep into the water. It didn't look like a loon, but that's what we tried to convince ourselves it was. We threw some more wood on the fire and tried to forget about it, but it still gave me the creeps. About an hour later, I had to go to the toilet, so I walked down to the edge of the dock and peed into the lake. Looking out over the moonlit lake, I noticed the thing was still there, but now it was much closer. It still looked like the woman's head, and it still seemed to be staring right at me. Its face was still extremely pale, as if it hadn't been out in the sun for years, and I could easily make out some facial features. The eyes and the nose. A feeling of incredible unease came over me as I realized it couldn't be a loon. There was no way a loon could just tread water for that long. There were no ripples around it either. It wasn't moving at all. It was just standing there, stiff as a board, submerged in the water. I immediately zipped up my pants and ran back up to the dock, to where my friends were, sitting around the campfire. I told them what I'd seen, but none of them dared to go down to the dock to take a closer look. We tried to tell ourselves it was just a log or a tree branch, just floating out in the water. I could tell everyone else felt uneasy too. None of us really believed that. We went back into the cabin and we shut the door, locking it behind us. It was very late and we just needed sleep. None of us mentioned a thing in the lake. We were all trying to avoid talking about it, honestly. There were no curtains on the windows, and I was getting ready for bed. I couldn't help but taking one last look. Peering out of the window, I could see the lake clearly, illuminated by the full moon. But the thing wasn't there anymore. It had completely vanished. I let out a sigh of relief, thinking it was a log that just floated away, or else it sank below the surface, or perhaps it had been a loon and had finally flown away. It was very hot that night and we had to sleep with the windows open. My friend Tommy and I slept in one bedroom, and my two other friends slept in the other. We left our bedroom doors open. I was finding it hard to sleep. Very, very hard. It was the middle of the summer and there was even a slight breeze. The heat was stifling. As I lay there, I thought I could hear someone walking around outside the cabin. I kept my eyes tightly shut and tried to tell myself it was just my imagination. It sounded like someone with bare, wet feet pacing back and forth. I was trembling with fear, but I felt so weak I couldn't move. The footsteps, they sounded like they were walking up the steps to the cabin door. I wanted to shout out to my friends, but I was frozen in terror. Then the footsteps turned around and sounded like they were running down the steps and toward the lake. After a while, the footsteps faded away and there was only silence. I reached over and shook my friend Tommy. He was already awake and he claimed he had heard the footsteps as well. Just then, I was startled to see Ryan coming running into our room. When he stepped into the moonlight, I could see his face and the expression on it was very, very disturbed. He told us we needed to leave. I asked why. "What did you hear?" He said, "Let's just go." He insisted. "Let's get to the boat and it's time to go." He wouldn't answer. He just ran back into his room. We followed him and found Kevin sitting on his bed already packing up his things. Ryan was running around frantically grabbing his stuff and stuffing it into a bag. "What's wrong?" I demanded. "Ryan, what the hell is wrong with you? Tell us." He just stopped in his tracks and stared at me. There was a haunted look in his eyes. I would never forget what he said. He told us he was turning over in his bed to get more comfortable when he suddenly saw at the top right corner of his window. Someone was peeking in. As soon as he set his eyes on it, the face vanished. He said all he saw was long black hair hanging down the window, ghostly white skin and one large eye staring at him. When he said that, it chilled us to the bone. We realized that if the face was in the top right corner of the window, that meant the thing had to be damn near 8 feet tall or else floating in midair. I felt like I was going to be sick. "Let's just go," Ryan said in a very serious tone. "Let's just go now." We all agreed and packed our stuff up as quickly as we could. We grabbed our bags and ran out of the cabin, locking the door behind us. As we scrambled down the front steps, I glanced to the side and I saw footprints. Bare, wet footprints in the dirt all around the cabin. We ran down to the boat and threw our stuff in. We untied the boat from the dock and we sped off. I looked back over my shoulder and stared at the island, but I didn't see anything moving. However, I had the strangest feeling that someone or something was watching us. When we finally reached the other side of the lake, we tied up the boat, stuffed our backpacks in the car and drove off. We had been driving for about 10 minutes when, out of the blue, Ryan suddenly broke down sobbing. He kept saying over and over, "What was it, guys? What was it? What did we see?" On the way, we called our parents to tell them what happened. Ryan was freaking out and we didn't know what to do. They told us to just get home safely and quickly. My friend's dad went up to the cabin a few days later and said he saw nothing out of the ordinary. However, he did mention that there were bare, wet footprints all around the cabin, which he thought was odd. Whatever Ryan saw in the window really hit him hard. After his breakdown, he had trouble sleeping and ended up having to go into therapy. They gave him some pills to calm him down and allow him to get a decent night's sleep. As time went on, he recovered and ended up being fine. But to this day, he still can't sleep unless the curtains on his window are completely shut. To this day, I still cannot explain what we saw on the lake that night. I never went back to the cabin. Tommy and Kevin had both gone back and everything was fine. But Ryan refuses to go back and frankly, I'm with him on this one. Story 13. I'm 30 years old and this story took place when I was 13. My mother was a single mom and she had to work 2 jobs. She worked at a grocery store in the morning and a bar at night. So I was home alone a lot, but it was okay because I was used to it. I could cook myself some dinner and walk back and forth to school. I was a pretty responsible kid for my age. One night I was watching TV while eating ice cream and someone knocked at the front door. I was wondering who it could be as my friends never came out this late and my mom would always use her key to get in. I opened the door and it was a man standing there with his hands in his pockets. I said, "Hello." He replied, "Hello, young lady. Are your parents home?" I said, "No, my mom isn't home right now. You have to come back tomorrow." He then said with a surprised smile on his face, "Oh, you're all alone, huh?" I said, "Yeah, I am." He replied with, "Okay, young lady, have a nice night. Don't get into any trouble." He then walked away and I closed the door. He seemed friendly, but also weird at the same time. He was a little funny looking though. He was balding and had 70s style glasses on with a mustache and bags under his eyes like he never slept. About 10 minutes passed and there was another knock at the door. I got up to answer it, but before I opened the door, something told me to put the chain on. I don't know why, but my gut told me to do that. It was strange because we really didn't use the chain, but I'm glad I did because as soon as I opened the door, it was pushed open, but abruptly stopped by the chain. Before I could even say or do anything, I looked through the crack of the door to see the same man again. And he said in a startled voice, oh, hey there. I just wanted to make sure you were okay." As he stuttered, It was like he knew he failed getting inside the house and tried to play off any suspicion by speaking quickly and making it seem like he didn't just obviously try coming into the house. I said, "I'm fine, thanks." And I shut the door. At that time, I didn't really understand the situation or the dangers of what just happened. But still, I was a bit freaked out and wanted my mom to come home soon. An hour went by and I was still thinking about what happened. So I started to watch a movie, trying to keep my mind occupied. When I heard, "Hey, let me get quick. I gotta tell you something." This was the scariest situation I've ever been into my life. It was the man. Once again, he was talking through the letterbox. I shouted, "Leave me alone." The letterbox closed. Then they started banging on the front door, screaming, "Let me in, you little shit," while slamming the front door handle up and down, trying to get in. I just stood back crying, praying he doesn't get in. He eventually gave up and left. My mom came home about 30 minutes later, just to find me crying. And I told her everything that happened. We told the police, but they never found this guy. I look back and I think how grateful I am that I had the feeling to put the chain on the door. I hate to think what that man would have done if he had managed to get in. Story 14. A few years ago, while I was in high school, the deep web was becoming very popular. I never really got into it until my friend told me about it because he was into that weird stuff. One day after school, I had nothing to do, so I went on to the browser tour. I didn't really see much, so I called my friend over so he could help me out. Once he got to my house, we started searching more and more. We saw a lot of drugs and illegal weapons, stuff like that. Then he clicked on a link that was in a chat room. And the link said, "Watch this." As we're sitting there, we're just staring at the screen that went from black to the outside of a building within a few seconds. And out of nowhere, a sticky note that said, "Want to see something cool?" So then I typed, "Yeah, sure." What was weird was the guy wouldn't type. He just showed sticky notes in the camera. And he also never spoke. All of a sudden, the camera started moving toward the building that it was facing. As we're watching him move toward the building, we noticed that the building was in our neighborhood. Then he quit moving and put another sticky note that said, "Lol." That kind of creeped me out. And then a person entered the building, which was eerily dark. The camera stopped at a padlocked door and then unlocked it and opened it. The camera moved toward the back of this dark room. And there was a dog bowl on the floor. Now, at this point, the camera was only facing the dog bowl. A few moments later, whoever the person was that was holding the camera, put something in the bowl that looked like just slop. Honestly, it looked like feces. Then you hear another door open and a girl crying in the background, along with a chain dragging. This girl shows up in the camera crying with a chain around her neck. And the guy shoved her face in the bowl and put the sticky note in front of the camera that said, "Cool, right?" Then the screen goes black. We sat there for about 10 minutes in disbelief, but the stream was still alive. Then out of nowhere, the camera was back on. And it was in the corner of my street. Then another sticky note that said 545 East 99th Street off of St. Clair. That was my address. Then another sticky note that said, "Open the door." We sat there confused. Then out of nowhere, a knock at the door. I grabbed my phone, jumped up, and we both ran to the back door. Then we heard a knock at that door right before I grabbed the handle. At that point, we had someone at the back door and someone at the front door knocking. We were stuck. Critical thinking was my strength at that point. We ran upstairs, called the cops, and locked ourselves in my room. The cops showed up, but no one was outside. Only items that the cops found were 100 sticky notes, all with my address written on them. I told the cops about the building with the girl, and they found it. The girl was 14 and had been missing for 5 weeks. We moved out of that house within a week, but I would never visit the deep or the dark web again. Story 15. This all started the night my girlfriend dumped me on Valentine's Day. The bad thing is that she lives right across the street from me. Anyways, with no date, I visited the deep web for about an hour. Then I went to a discussion forum. I decided to leave her address in there with the title of "Visit if you want to get time." Nobody responded to it, so I got off the laptop and played PUBG. About 2 hours after I started, I got bored, so I went back on that discussion board and noticed a few replies. It was 27 replies from the same person, and it asked, "Are you home?" I didn't think much of it, and I got off my laptop again. I decided to play a prank and order some pizza to my ex-girlfriend's house. About 45 minutes later, I see a car pull up with no lights on. At this time, it's about 8 p.m., so it's pretty dark by now. I thought to myself that this was weird, but anyways, the car parked and the man in all black got out and started walking to her door, but he didn't have any pizza. I thought that was really weird, so at that point I walked away from my window because she'll be able to see me when she opens her door and it'd be pretty obvious that I played a prank. When I came back to the window, I saw something that made my blood boil to the fullest. This man was dragging her down her front stairs, and she was kicking and screaming. I then opened my window and yelled for him to stop. Then I proceeded to run down the stairs to go outside to help her, but by the time I got outside, he was in the car with her. I jumped in front of the car to stop him, but he hit me with it and he sped off with her inside. I laid there in pain until the pizza man actually showed up and he called the cops. I never told anyone that I provided her address. But at the same time that person replied and he said thank you in that post. I can't tell anyone about this because I don't know what would happen to me. But since that day no one has seen my ex-girlfriend, and I would never go back on the deep or the dark web. Story 16. When I was 19 years old in 1985 on New Year's Eve, a bunch of my friends and I went to a rooftop bar of a hotel. About a half hour before midnight, I ran down to my car because I had forgotten my camera. I figured I would have plenty of time to get back up there and find my friends. I grabbed my camera and I got into an elevator all by myself. About halfway up, the elevator started shaking and it stopped completely. I was trapped. I have always had a problem with confined spaces, so this was not an ideal situation for me. After a few minutes, everything went silent that was going on outside. Then out of nowhere, the elevator lights went out and I started to hear children laughing, but this was not the type of place where children would be. My heart started beating faster and faster and harder and harder. Then all of a sudden, I passed out. As I woke up, I noticed that I could not move or talk. I thought to myself, not sleep paralysis again. Then the lights started to flicker on and off, and then all of a sudden, I see a black figure to the left of me in the corner of the elevator, crouching down, smiling at me. I tried to scream, but nothing would come out. I tried to move, but I couldn't. A guy came over the loudspeaker and told me there was an electrical short and that he would have me out soon. There's a camera in the elevator, so to the security guard it looked like I was just laying there. I guess they figured I was drunk being that it's New Year's. Anyways, every attempt to scream or move that figure would just start laughing at me and pointing. This whole time the lights are flickering. Then all of a sudden, I can hear the huge crowds counting down for New Year's. 10. The dark figure is staring at me and now with a menacing smile, with 10 fingers up. 9. He's still looking at me with 9 fingers up and he's moving closer. 8. He was still looking at me with 8 fingers up and he's closer. 7. The same thing. 6. The same thing. 5. The same thing. 4. He's drooling and he's much closer. 3. He's closer. 2. He was closer. Then the lights quit flickering and it was pitch black. Then all of a sudden, outside went silent again. I felt breathing in my right ear and then out of nowhere I hear one. I couldn't breathe. The lights started to flicker again, then the figure was on my chest and all of a sudden it was gone and I can talk and move again. Usually when I have sleep paralysis something bad happens. Once I got out of the elevator an hour later I found out that there was a brawl during the countdown on the rooftop bar that I was at and 4 people were killed by some maniac who was waiting until the end of the countdown to start hacking up people with a machete. Ever since then I have not had a sleep paralysis episode. Story 17. I will not use any names in this. At least not the real names. We had already been in Afghanistan for 2 weeks at this point and our FOB had been attacked at least 6 times already. If you don't know what a FOB is, it's a forward operating base. It was a very small blackout FOB, and we call it blackout because at night we couldn't have any lights on outside due to indirect fire or sniper fire. Anyways, a week goes by and nothing happens. So our company is being told that we're doing a mission together, a company mission. Usually we had gone on missions at the platoon level, which is 1 level under company. By this time of deployment we had been on a few key leader engagements and nothing much happened. The only contact we received was at the FOB, but a lot of us had a bad feeling about this one. To make a long story short, we ended up going on a mission and we moved on foot about 2 kilometers to the east at around 1 a.m. And we set up our patrol base at around 3 a.m. and then sent out each platoon to their own sector. Each platoon moved a few kilometers away while headquarters stay at our patrol base. I'm on the radio talking with our forward observers from each platoon and they're reporting up that they can hear the enemy but they can't see them. At this point it's still dark and we were basically in the backyard of the enemy, and this area is known for the Taliban. These guys are freaking out on the radio as they keep saying the Taliban is out there but we can't see them. Then at our patrol base some local man walks up and our interpreter ends up talking to him. As he's speaking to the interpreter is telling us everything he's saying. At this point I'm holding my weapon pointed down to the ground and I slip my finger to the trigger and I look at the interpreter with him not knowing that I understand everything he's saying. I tell him that's not what he's saying while looking him straight in the eyes. My commander looked at me and said, "What?" I repeated, "That's not what he's saying." The interpreter is lying. The interpreter was telling us that this guy wanted food and water. What he was really saying is that there's Taliban all around us and they outnumber us, and he knew about everything we were doing before we even came out here and that they're going to attack us and our FOB. At this point the interpreter looks at me with wide eyes and starts to run toward his bag. As the interpreter is running towards his bag he screams Allah Akbar. When he reached in his bag he grabbed the detonator and he squeezed it and then boom. He had a bomb in the middle of our patrol base but it only injured a few of us. He was immediately shot and all hell broke loose. Shots are coming from everywhere, but we can't pinpoint where. Immediately 7 people were shot. I got down next to my commander and I'm on my radio talking to my forward observers who are trying to call in artillery and mortars. I'm trying to aim my weapon but can't tell who is who because it's so dark. We have on night vision but they suck. Guys are screaming that they are hit and some guys are cowering behind boulders. Then over the radio I hear, I'm not going to use his real name, Sergeant Smith is down. Luckily at this point the sun is starting to come up and a few of us run over to where Sergeant Smith was and I saw him. I saw Sergeant Smith face down and not moving. The medic and I grab and drag him. My buddy was right next to him and he saw Sergeant Smith's face when we turned him over and he started crying and freaking out because his face looked like he was screaming but it was just stuck there. I stopped for a second when I saw his face but I snapped right out of it. This was my first appointment. This was my first dead body. Sergeant Smith was one of those guys that was really untouchable, alpha male, very in shape and had everything going for him. When the guys saw that he was killed they definitely thought that they were next because he was like a super soldier to these guys. I asked my buddy where did he see the enemy? Where's the Taliban? And he pointed and said 10 meters that way. I thought to myself 10 meters, that means that they're inside our patrol base now. I pause and I look around. I never seen so many self-proclaimed tough guys turn into little girls so quick and so many guys that didn't believe in God start praying for God. I will not go into everything else because it's pretty hard for me. Just know that some of us had to fight with our hands because the enemy was so close to us. We only lost 1 guy that day but we had 18 people wounded. 13 of those people were shot but everyone was mentally wounded and still are. We all thought that we were untouchable because we jumped out of planes, knew how to fight and lifted weights. Everyone is a tough guy until they have to do tough guy shit. Story 18. When I was in high school I was a really naive, sheltered teenager. We lived in a really close community where there were really never any crimes. There was a married couple who moved in at the end of our block. They had 2 boys. One was the same age as me and the other was 2 years older. There's no nice way to put this. The boy who was my age was really ugly. He looked kind of like a sloth from the Goonies. However, his older brother was really cute. I mean, he looked like a model. I sat next to Sloth, the younger brother, in a few of my classes at school. I also worked on some projects with him. One day, when I was sitting beside him in class, I started making idle chit-chat with him. He looked straight into my eyes and said, "You better watch out. My older brother likes you, and the last girl he liked is the reason we had to move." I was so shocked. I didn't know what to say. He made it sound so grave and serious. That was all he said to me. A few weeks later my parents went out shopping and I was left home alone. It was nighttime and all of a sudden I heard the doorbell ring. When I answered the door there was nobody there. Then I noticed a small envelope with my name on it sitting on the doormat. I opened it. While the contents were disturbing to say the least. It was a long poem about me being attacked by a man in a cape who sneaked up on me, knocked me out with chloroform, then tied me up and brought me back to his basement where he did unspeakable things to me. I thought it must be one of my friends pulling a prank on me. I called my friend on the phone and told her, "You got me." The poem was super creepy and really freaked me out. She had no idea what I was talking about. All of a sudden, while I was on the phone with her, I heard something banging against the back door of the house. It was soft at first, but it got louder and kept going on and on. Then the banging suddenly stopped and everything was silent. I was still convinced it must be one of my friends playing a trick, so I peeked out the kitchen window. I couldn't see anyone. I was still on the phone with my friend, and she was yelling at me to call the police. Just then the doorbell rang again. I creeped down the hall, pressed myself up to the door, and peeked out the peephole. Nobody was there, but I could make out a large black lump on the front porch. I couldn't see what it was, so I flicked the switch for the porch light, but it didn't come on. At this point I was so scared I was about to have a heart attack. My friend convinced me to hang up and call the police. A few minutes later a squad car came by and I looked out the window. Across the street under a street lamp I could see the older brother, the cute guy. He was just standing there smoking a cigarette and watching my house. The police went up and questioned him. Then I saw them try to search him, but he started fighting and they had to tackle him to the ground. Eventually they managed to put the handcuffs on him. When they searched him they found a lot of things. The light bulb from my porch light, a jar of chloroform, a length of rope, and a bloody knife. It was bloody because the black lump on my porch was the next door neighbor's cat. He had killed it and carved my name in it. The older brother was a really cute guy, but he was mentally disturbed. He was really crazy and his parents didn't care. The younger brother had tried to warn me. I felt bad about calling him SWAT. He turned out to be one of the smartest and nicest guys in my high school. I think he gave me such a cryptic warning because he was afraid of his older brother. He was scared that his brother would find out and maybe hurt him. I also felt terrible for the family next door and their cat that was killed. Story 19. My friend was playing rugby at a local pitch and it was his job to lock up the changing rooms. By the time he'd finished it was dark outside. He started walking home and he noticed the figure standing at the other end of the field. He thought it was just some guy walking through the park, but then the figure started walking across the field towards him. My friend just stood there looking, and the figure started speeding up until it was actually running towards him at full speed. At this point my friend was freaked out. That was when the worst part happened. The figure suddenly seemed to drop forward onto all fours and it was still running at full speed. It was wearing a coat or a cloak that was trailing behind it. My friend turned and ran as fast as he could towards the car park. When he got to his car and jumped in, he turned back to look at the field, but there was nothing there. After my friend described this to me, I actually couldn't sleep for 2 nights straight. He told another friend of mine who used to walk her dog at the same park, and neither of us had gone back there since. Story 20. A few years ago, I was sharing a house with my roommate. We didn't know each other very well, and we worked at different times, so we didn't see each other much. It was a nice little cottage that had been built in the 1920s. Almost from that moment I moved in, I would hear noises of crying, sobbing, and choking coming from the bathroom. When I knocked at the door and asked if everything was okay, no one would answer. I just assumed my roommate was upset or sick and wanted to be left alone. This went on for months. Then one day my roommate and I were sitting in the living room and she asked if I was feeling okay. "Yeah, I'm fine," I replied. "Why do you ask?" "Well, it's just that I heard you crying in the bathroom this morning," she said. I thought that was you," I said. That was when we realized that for the past couple of months both of us had been hearing crying in the bathroom and both of us thought it was the other one. We never figured out where the sounds were coming from. Story 21. The scariest moment of my life took place when I was 8 years old. On the street where I lived there was a vacant lot, and next to that there was an abandoned house. You could see it from my bedroom window. My friend and I were playing in the bedroom. We were obsessed with Nancy Drew books, so we pretended we were girl detectives. We had binoculars and made up a story that there were dangerous criminals hiding out in the abandoned house, and it was our job to catch them. We were having a lot of fun playing detectives, and pretty soon we were on the steps of the house. I was trying to be brave, so I turned the door handle and was about to go inside. All of a sudden I had a terrible feeling in the pit of my stomach. I looked at my friend, and she was scared as well. We stopped playing detectives and ran off home. 2 days later there were a bunch of police cars outside the abandoned house. It turned out that 2 convicted murderers had escaped from prison, and they had been using that house as their hideout. I have no idea what would have happened if I had opened that door, but I still dread to think about it. Story 22. This is a true story, and even now, years later, I still get goosebumps thinking about it. When I was 19 years old, I worked as a counselor in a summer camp. It was really gorgeous, with wooden cabins and a lake, but it was in the middle of nowhere. The camp was surrounded by dense woods. There was nothing but trees and canyons, and the closest town was over 20 miles away. One night when everyone had turned in and was sleeping soundly, I was suddenly awoken in the middle of the night. It was one of those times where you wake up and you have that feeling that something is not quite right. My heart was racing for no apparent reason. I just lay there quietly, listening intently. The whole cabin was wooden, with fly screens over the windows so I could hear the sound of crickets and breeze blowing through the trees. That's when I heard it. A very thin cry for help. It sounded like it was coming from the woods. It was the cry of a young girl lost somewhere out in the woods. I quickly got out of bed and woke my roommate, who was another counselor. I told him to listen, and when the cry came again, we both heard it. We quickly got dressed, grabbed our flashlights, and hurried outside in the direction the sound was coming from. It was intermittent, but I could clearly hear the girl's voice saying help or I'm lost quite regularly and quite a way into the woods. She sounded like she was in a lot of distress. The quicker we found her the better, so we could get her back to camp safely. It was very dark that night, and all we had to light our way were 2 puny flashlights. The girl was out there in the pitch black with no way of seeing anything at all. The boys' cabins were on one side of the lake and the girls were on the other. On the way we ran into the female counselor. She had heard the cries too from her side of camp. All 3 of us headed into the woods together, shining our torches left and right and calling out for the lost girl. We were reluctant to go too far into the woods because we didn't want to get lost in the darkness. Whenever we called out to the girl and heard her respond, it sounded like she was quite far in. After walking for about 5 minutes, we could hear her crying and sniffling, so we knew we were close. It sounded like she was only a few feet away, and we could hear her saying, "I'm scared. Where am I?" in a low voice. We kept trying to reassure her, and just when we felt we were right beside her, she suddenly went silent. "We're here. Where are you?" We called out, but there was no answer. Then in the distance we heard her voice again, crying, "Help me. I'm lost. Come quick." We started toward the sound of her cries, and just when we felt that we were right on top of her again, she went silent. We called out to her. We waited for her reply. Nothing. Then from even farther away we heard her voice again. "Help. Why can't you help me?" Something didn't feel right. We all looked at each other, and without a word we decided to head back to camp. We called out to the girl and told her we were going to get help and we would come back with a search party. We could still hear faint whimpers and crying sounds from her, so we told her to sit tight and we would be back soon. The three of us sprinted back to camp and rang the big bell at the main office to alert the whole camp that there was an emergency. The camp manager switched on the floodlights and we all met in the quad for a roll call and a head count. They started by calling the names of the counselors. We were all present. Then they called the names of the campers. All of the kids were present. Nobody was missing. They went through the roll twice and 3 times. Every single person that was meant to be at the camp was checked off and present. But what about the voice of the girl? The camp manager and the other counselors thought it was a false alarm and said that what we had heard must have been just echoes from our own voices. They dismissed everyone and sent us back to bed. The 3 of us knew what we had heard and it wasn't an echo. It was creepy as hell. The voice kept leading us into the woods further and further. Someone or something was luring us deeper into the woods, and to this day, I have no idea what it intended to do to us. This was by far the creepiest thing I have ever experienced. Myself and the female counselor believed it was something paranormal, but neither of us could explain it. The counselor, who was my roommate, refused to talk about it, and whenever we brought it up, he would say it was just voices echoing. But when I looked in his eyes, I could see that he was scared to death. He just wanted to convince himself it didn't happen. Story 23. I shouldn't have been there. My friend was supposed to be alone. 3 years have passed since that night, but I'll try to tell you what happened as far as I know. Earlier that day, my friend's parents had left for a weekend vacation. She was alone in the house. I offered to come over and keep her company. I arrived about 8 p.m. and we spent the night chatting and watching TV in her bedroom. The time passed so quickly that before we knew it, it was midnight. That's when everything got weird. We began to hear strange noises outside her bedroom. At first we thought it was just the house settling, but then we stopped talking and listened. There were soft footsteps coming up the stairs. "Do you think your parents have come back?" I asked. She said her parents were not supposed to return until the next evening. Besides, there were too many footsteps for just 2 people. I ran over to the door, and just before the footsteps reached the hallway, I turned the key in the lock. Suddenly there was a profound silence. "Is there anyone out there?" my friend asked nervously. We were sure there was someone outside, but who could it be? Just then we heard a beep. We whirled around and stared at my friend's laptop. She had just received an email. She opened it. The sender was unrecognizable. Just a random combination of numbers and letters. When we read the message, it sent a chill down our spines. "Whatever happens, do not open the door." As soon as I read those words, a seeking feeling came over me. My heart was beating fast and I was about to have a panic attack. I didn't know what to think. Maybe it was just someone playing a silly joke on us. Maybe it was someone trying to save our lives. Now we knew there was someone out there behind the door. Suddenly we heard a voice. It sounded like my friend's mother. "Please open the door. Your father and I were in a car accident. We are badly hurt. Please open the door and help us." When she heard this, my friend stared at me wide-eyed. I can still remember the expression on her face. She was in shock. Neither of us knew what to do. "Please open the door." It sounded like her father. My friend and I just stood there for a few seconds, frozen to the spot. Then she started towards the door. I grabbed her by the arm and held her back. She turned slowly to me and said, "It's my parents. They need help. I'm going to open the door." "What about that email?" I said through gritted teeth. "What if it's true? What if they're not your parents?" "Nonsense. You heard them. Those were the voices of my parents." Before I could do anything, she struggled out of my grasp and walked towards the door. I still don't know what to make of it. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was sheer terror. The only thing I could think to do was run into the closet and hide. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I was frightened out of my wits. What I heard then I will never be able to forget. To this day I have nightmares about it. My friend opened the door and all I could hear were her screams. They were blood-curdling screams filled with pain and terror. I couldn't help her. All I could do was cover myself in the closet, keeping perfectly still, praying that I wouldn't be found. I don't know how long I stayed there. It could have been hours. By the time I felt safe enough to come out, it was morning. The bedroom was empty and the door was open. My friend was nowhere to be found. I ran all the way home and called her parents. When I managed to reach them, they told me they were still on vacation. I told them what had happened the night before, and they immediately called the police. They searched for days, but they never found my friend. I doubt they ever will. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know who or what came around and took my friend away, but I know they were out there. I also know that I shouldn't have been there that night. I shouldn't know that they exist. I know someday they will come for me, but whatever happens, I will not open the door. Story 24. There was a teenage girl who was hired to babysit 2 young children. After the parents left, she put the kids to bed and then went downstairs to watch TV. Suddenly she heard a noise coming from the basement. It was the washing machine starting up. She was about to go and turn it off, but when she opened the basement door, the noise stopped. Shrugging her shoulders, she returned to the living room and resumed watching TV. 5 minutes later, she heard the washing machine starting up again. She got up, opened the basement door, and started walking down the steps. She had only gone down a few steps when the noise stopped again. She went back up to watch TV. A few moments later, she heard the washing machine yet again. Worried, she went upstairs, gathered the children, and ran over to the neighbor's house to call the police. They arrived a few moments later and went down to search the basement. They found a man armed with an axe hiding behind the washing machine. He had been trying to lure the babysitter down to the basement in order to kill her. Thank you for listening, and I wish you good health. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to support us. Thank you very much.